Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to MCJ Report number 157. That's right, welcome to the broadcast. This is independent media that you're watching right now. That's right, so you're not going to get the same old rubbish that you're used to on the mainstream media. We like to look at a lot of different angles and actually give some context to what we say, which is, of course, something the mainstream media should start doing, but it looks like those days are unfortunately over. So we have the broadcast running simultaneously tonight. We're on Rumble, YouTube, and on Facebook. That's right. So MCJ Report, usually not playing on Facebook, but I thought that we'd make an exception to it. So welcome to the show. I hope that everyone is doing well. Maybe you're seeing the show for the first time. You're watching MCJ Report. I'm your host, Morgan C. Jonas, an independent Senate candidate for this year's federal election. That's right. So, ladies and gentlemen, the first thing you can do is give the broadcast a share, get it out there, share it out to all your networks. We're going to give a different side of the story that you otherwise may not get, or probably would not get, or most definitely not get on the mainstream media. So let's get it underway, shall we? We're going to have a talk about the surge in fuel prices. That's right. If you live, well, I was going to say if you live in Victoria, but if you live anywhere in the world, you are horrified by the types of figures that you're seeing at the pump right now. Here in Melbourne, we're looking at $2.20 a litre. That's what I saw today. It's completely unaffordable, and it's actually not necessary. It's not necessary. We know that you and I, we're not in control of the global price of oil, but the government, of course, has a very hefty excise plus GST on top, and could do us a little favor by at least giving us an exemption during this really difficult period. Of course, so many of us struggling after the devastation of the COVID policies. Do you think the government will do that? I wouldn't hold your breath. I think the government needs to grab all the tax dollars they can from anywhere they can. And if you ask me, the government is not very good at spending money. Look what they've done with our tax dollars throughout the past 2 years alone. That's right. Also on the show tonight, we're going to just make a mention of heart attacks. That's right. So we're seeing a trend of people in their early 50s. We're going to mention 3 people specifically, all of them age 52, that suffered from heart attacks that basically came out of nowhere. So 2 unfortunately passed away, 1 recovered. And I'm also hearing reports of other people in their 50s experiencing similar types of heart-related complications. So we're going to have a talk about that. Also on tonight's show, I was going to speak about the huge spending of former prime ministers. Not spending from their personal pockets, spending from, our money, our tax money. I started making a report on that, went down a rabbit hole. It is so much bigger and so much worse than what I initially suspected that it's going to require a complete MCJ report, maybe a whole 1-hour presentation or maybe 2 hours, in order to at least begin to put into context how much money, a ridiculous, unspeakable amount of money, you and I, taxpayers, are paying to these politicians that aren't even in office anymore. We're talking about things like international travel allowances, office allowances, even allowances for engaging in leisure. It's an absolute rot of the system. It's not democratic. Now, you and I, we did not vote for politicians to live lavish lifestyles once leaving office. We didn't vote for that. Who do you think voted for them? The people that are in office. That's right. Why not? Why not just slip these particulars into a bill? The population will be none the wiser, and then the joke's on us. Well, I say the joke has been on us, the Australian people, for far too long now. And if there is a silver lining to this COVID-19 debacle, it's that more Australians, more so right now than any time ever before, are paying close attention to these people that work in office. And we are absolutely dedicated to holding them accountable and calling them out for misconduct in whatever way, shape, or form that misconduct appears to us. COVID has really shined a huge light on this, hasn't it, ladies and gentlemen? How many people out there voted for the government to spend such huge amounts of money during this period? Why should it be up to the taxpayer to fund the pandemic protocols of the government? Why can it not be up to individuals should they choose to participate in these certain protocols? Who here is familiar with the Great Barrington Declaration? Put your hand up if you are aware of this document. Signed by thousands of medical experts around the world, basically stipulates that in the event of a pandemic or a health crisis, it should really be the responsibility of the individual in terms of how they choose to manage their health, what preventative measures they take, and ultimately such measures should not be forced upon the people. Now let me ask you a question. What is wrong with that? What is wrong with that? Does the government think we're too silly, too stupid to manage our own affairs, or could there be other factors at hand? Well, anyway, ladies and gentlemen, we've been beating the same drum for about 2 years now. So without further ado, let's get started with the show. And our first topic for the evening is... just a quick mention, that's right, a bit of a shameless self-plug, so that's right, me, Morgan C. Jonas, going independent, that's right, running for Senate. We know that the odds are stacked against us, but as they say, drastic times calls for drastic measures. If you'd like to get on board with this independent campaign that I can tell you is unlike any campaign you've ever seen before, you can go ahead and register your details at morgancjonas.com. Anywhere you live in Victoria, we're all getting involved. We're going to be going across the entire state, and we are out to make an impact. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. So morgancjonas.com get on board and potentially be part of history. How good is that? I reckon that's pretty good. All right, anyway, ladies and gentlemen, let's get this show started. For the first topic of the evening, we have, all right, absolutely disgraceful. Fuel prices surge. All right, so all over the world, we're experiencing these huge increases in fuel. Now, if all you did was listen to the mainstream media, they may tell you, well, this is because of the conflict that's currently taking place in the Ukraine. Well, ladies and gentlemen, prices were already moving in this direction before that particular conflict started. Now, I'm not saying the conflict has nothing to do with these prices. Of course it does. Russia is a net exporter of oil. Russia accounts for approximately 10% of the global oil supply if we're talking about exports. So it is absolutely one of the attributing factors, I think we can say with confidence, that the conflict in Russia and of course the effect that has had on global supply has played a role in pushing up these prices. But it's not as easy as that. It's simply not a simple matter of, well, there's 10% less oil being exported due to the sanctions and embargoes, therefore the price is skyrocketing out of control. That is not exactly how the market works. We're going to have a little bit of a talk about it. All right, so as we just mentioned there, Russia provides 10% of global oil supply, but that's really not the only thing we should be looking at. What drives oil prices? Now, I've got a great video here. It only goes for a couple of minutes, courtesy of Investopedia, a great resource, a resource that I encourage everybody to look at in order to provide further context to various vague notions that may or may not be mentioned on the mainstream media. So I've got this video. Thank you, Investopedia. I'm going to play it for you right now.
Have you ever wondered why oil's price fluctuates more than the value of many other investments? The biggest influence on oil's price is OPEC, a consortium of 13 countries that controls 40% of the world's oil supply. It affects oil's price by changing production levels. For example, OPEC maintained 2014's production level despite lower demand in Europe and China, which caused an oil excess and a fall in price from $100 per barrel to less than $50. Natural disasters are another factor. Hurricane Katrina affected 19% of the United States oil supply in 2005, causing prices to climb $3 per barrel. Production costs also change oil prices. Extracting oil from Middle East locations is relatively cheap, but oil from the oil sands of Alberta, Canada is more expensive. Prices may rise if cheaper sources exhaust their supplies, leaving only the more expensive sites. Finally, political instability may affect oil prices. In July of 2008, oil's price reached $136 per barrel when wars and unrest in Afghanistan and Iraq stoked consumer fears.
All right, I hope you enjoyed that. Once again, a big thank you to the team at Investopedia. Great website, great resource. I highly recommend that you go and check it out. All right, so we're going to create a little bit more context here. Let me just pull the browser up. All right, here we go. So Investopedia.com, great article. I highly recommend it. What determines oil prices? I've made a few highlights here. So here are some key takeaways in relation to oil prices. I'm going to read them to you. All right, like most commodities, the fundamental driver of oil's price is supply and demand in the market. Okay, so simply put, the less supply there is and the more demand there is, that will create the outcome of prices rising up, just like the property market or any other market in that particular supply and demand scenario. Goes on to say, oil markets are composed of speculators who are betting on price moves. That's right. So kind of similar to betting on a horse race, betting on an outcome before that outcome occurs due to based on speculation. Goes on to say, and hedgers who are limiting risk in the production or oil or consumption of oil. Oil supply is controlled somewhat by a cartel of oil-producing nations called OPEC. All right, so for those of you unfamiliar with OPEC, here's a brief description, at least according to them on their website. That is the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries. It says here, quote, their mission In accordance with its statute, there's always a statute behind these things, by the way, the mission of the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, is to coordinate and unify the petroleum policies of its member countries and ensure stabilization of oil markets in order to secure an efficient, economic, and regular supply of petroleum to consumers. Do you think that's happening now? Yes or no? Put your answer in the comments. To consumers, a steady income to producers, and a fair return on capital for those investing in the petroleum industry. All right, so let me ask you a question at home. Who do you think is doing better right now? Those investing in the petroleum industry, billionaires, hedge funds, corporations like that, or the end consumer driving around trying to make ends meet? That's a good question that maybe you can raise around the dinner table with your friends and family. Anyway, going back here, goes on to say, oil demand is driven by everything from gasoline for cars and airline travel to electrical generation. Alrighty, so let's keep on reading, and this will create a little bit more context for you for the next time that you drive past BP and all you want to do is just kind of put your palm in your face because petrol is just out of control. All right. Determinants of oil prices. Two primary factors that we touched on: supply and demand, and market sentiment. All right, so let's go down here and actually let me just see if. No, that's not what I wanted to do. Let me just. There's something on the screen, and I think it's gone now. All right, perfect, good to go. We're a one-man band here at MCJ Report, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your patience. All right, going to keep on reading here. The price of oil, as we know it, is actually set in the oil futures market. All right, so what does that mean? An oil futures contract is a binding agreement that gives one the right to purchase oil by the barrel at a predefined price on a predefined date in the future. Under a futures contract, both the buyer and the seller are obligated to fulfill their side of the transaction on the specified date. All right, so as you can see, there's a little bit more to the price of oil outside of a conflict that is taking place at any given time. Moving along here, the following are two types of futures traders: hedgers and speculators. All right, so what does that mean? An example of a hedger would be an airline buying oil futures to guard against potential rising prices. An example of a speculator would be someone who is just guessing the price direction and has no intention of actually buying the product. So how could this possibly be, ladies and gentlemen? How could somebody or a firm out there be in a position to potentially influence the price of oil without actually being involved in the drilling process, without actually owning oil, rather, as it says here, just guessing the price and direction of the future, kind of like placing a bet. Like, you don't need to own a horse to place a bet on it. Goes on to say here, according to the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, the majority of futures trading done by speculators, whereby the purchaser of a futures contract takes possession of the commodity, is less than 3%. And of course, they wouldn't want it to be more than 3% because these types of characters are only interested in speculation. They're not exchanging a tangible product. And I have some major reservations about whether or not this type of business is ethical in the first place. What do you think? Put your comments down there in the comment section. Goes on to say, the other key factor in determining oil prices is sentiment. The mere belief that oil demand will increase dramatically at some point in the future can result in a dramatic increase in oil prices in the present, as speculators and hedgers alike snap up oil futures contracts. That's right. Meanwhile, we're driving around struggling to fill up our tanks. All right, so there's that right there. I hope this is starting to build some context. Here's a little segment that I also wanted to touch on here. This is from fxempire.com. I'll post these links on the Telegram channel MCJ Report if you'd like to read them in a bit more detail. Okay, so this was published today, actually. Crude oil prices soared last week to their highest level since 2008 as traders assess the damage to global supply from Russia's invasion of Ukraine. All right, so let's have a bit of a read down here. Okay, so let me just find out. I had this highlighted before. Sorry, just give me 1 second. Okay, so crude oil prices soared to their highest, as it said, And this was a high spike after the announcement of a US ban on Russian oil and Russian products. However, they pulled back sharply throughout the week as some producing countries signaled they may boost supply. Also, adding to the market's volatility was the uncertainty over the US-Iran nuclear deal. Earlier in the week, traders were convinced the deal would be signed on Friday. However, supply concerns grew when talks to revive the 2015 deal faced the threat of a collapse, and last-minute Russian demand forced world powers to pause negotiations. All right, so a little bit more context for you there. All right, so why does this affect us here in Australia? That's a question that some people may be asking. It is true that we have oil reserves in Australia, but it's also true that we are a net importer of oil, both crude and refined. Now, why might that be? We have the reserves here. Some people argue that our oil is not of a high enough standard to drill, or it's not viable to drill this oil and to refine it into usable petroleum. There are also people that argue against that notion as well. So let's just take a little bit of a look here at our imports and where they come from. All right, so refined petroleum, Australia, of course, being an importer. As you can see, our biggest source here is Singapore, followed by South Korea, Japan, and then China. We're also an importer of crude petroleum, but you can expect for these importing metrics to decrease over time, that coinciding with the shutting down of our oil refineries in Australia. Okay, once upon a time in this country, actually not all that long ago, we produced our own oil, we refined our own oil, and we were independent with that particular commodity. Now that's actually changed. That has changed. So why has it changed? Let's look a little bit further. So where do we stand today in terms of oil in Australia? This gives us a really good overview of where we're at. This is coming from worldometer.info, another great resource. Australia oil. Okay, so as you can see right here, our reserves, 1.193 billion barrels. Our production, however, is only 373,728 barrels. And let me just say this is data from 2016, so give it a little bit of leeway. Our oil consumption, however, 1,114,645. So that means that we are running at a daily deficit. The figures we look at here, a daily deficit of over 740,000 barrels. You can see our imports here at 302,000 and also our exports. It's also true that we export crude oil to be refined and we buy it back and we bring it back to Australia. And obviously, we'd love to take care of that entire process right here at home. Now, this chart gives you a bit of an understanding of where we were in the past in terms of oil production and consumption here at home and where we are today. So the year I'd like to point out to you is 1988. Okay, so why is this year significant? It was 1988 that the government decided to heavily deregulate our oil industry in Australia, and there were many changes that transpired after that deregulation. Changes pertaining to, but not limited to, production, exploration, and rights, and other types of environmentalist policies that were put through that I think probably need to be revisited in order to determine whether or not that was the best move for the country. So if you look at this chart here at 1988, you can see the consumption we had was close to 700,000 barrels per day, and we were producing just over 630. So there's really not much of a shortfall there. We were close to being oil dependent. But since deregulation, and as time has gone on, you can clearly see by the graph that oil production has been steadily decreasing whilst oil consumption has been increasing. And along with this trend, of course, is the importation of oil from foreign nations. So why do you think this is? And where do you think this is all going? A good question to ask yourself is, should there be some type of conflict within our immediate geopolitical region, how long would it take for Australia to be completely out of oil? And it's also important to point out that nations that are oil independent have a layer of protection against the global price of oil, which of course is very heavily influenced by OPEC and the speculators and these firms that invest in futures. If possible, it should be the objective of any nation in the world to be energy independent in order to spare the civilians of these types of drastic market fluctuations. Is it possible to do it here in Australia? Is it possible the government has implemented policy that has potentially sabotaged this particular industry? Well, I don't exactly have the answer to that question, but I do say that it thoroughly needs to be investigated. What happens if there's a conflict in our geopolitical region and there's a blockade and the maritime shipping vessels are unable to make their way to and from Australia? We could be looking at a situation where potentially our country is out of oil. Now, what does that look like? That means no trucks on the road. That means empty supermarket shelves. Industry comes to a grinding halt, and we are absolutely upstream, downstream without a paddle. All right, so what do the experts say? Or maybe they're not really experts, but as you and I know, the term expert has lost a lot of its meaning in this day and age. Does Australia have close to 90 days of oil reserves? Well, maybe it does, and maybe it doesn't. So this is coming from the Associated Press here. Australia is a member of the International Energy Agency and a signatory to the 1974 treaty that requires IEA members to hold oil reserves that will cover at least 90 days in the event of a severe oil supply disruption, like a natural disaster or a war. Now, I've also read other documents analyzing this particular figure, which appeared to suggest that our oil supply in terms of use for regular people could be actually a lot less than 90 days. It very much depends on the circumstances and in what areas that oil is most required, should there be some type of disastrous event. Okay, so in other words, all it would take is for there to be some type of maritime blockade, and Australia could very much be in a huge world of hurt. Whereas if we were able to be energy independent, we would have a massive upper hand in the event of such a crisis. All right, so just have a little bit of a think about that. All right, now that just about wraps us up for the end of this this segment here. There is something the government could do in the meantime that could alleviate a lot of the pressure from us in terms of these petrol prices. Okay, every time you fill up at the pump, you're paying excise plus GST. The current excise for fuel is 44.2 cents per litre, and GST is, of course, 10%. So if the government found it in their heart to give us a little bit of a break, which I don't think they will, this price you're looking at here of $2.20, it could be closer to about $1.55 or $1.60 if the government was to actually do something decent for the people and give a fuel excise and GST exemption, at least for the foreseeable future, until these global oil prices start coming down. Do you think the government's going to do it? I wouldn't hold my breath. I don't think they're going to. I tell you what, if we had decent people in office, they immediately would address this problem by getting rid of, or at least temporarily blocking these additional taxes that we really shouldn't be paying in the first place. So I hope that you enjoyed this segment, and moving on to the next section. All right, now moving along here, ladies and gentlemen. So what do we have? All right, so Greg Hunt encourages heart checks for Australians in their 50s. Okay, so this is something that we really haven't seen before. Of course, we've seen some notable people in the public space suffering from heart attacks. There have been 3 very notable cases, and I believe there's actually more, but we're going to talk about 3. Coincidentally, they were all aged 52 years old. Sadly, 2 of them died. One of them was lucky to survive. So Greg Hunt has been speaking about things like heart health, and that it's important for people to go and get heart checkups. And he really hasn't given any more details outside of those particular words. Why do you think that might be, ladies and gentlemen? All right, so let's have a little bit of a look here, shall we, at some of the cases that we've experienced. All right, so AFL Premiership player Dean Wallace, 52 years old, undergoes life-saving surgery after a heart attack. All right, so this happened just a couple of days after Shane Warne said that he suffered a heart attack and was rushed to hospital. And the rest of the article basically just talks about his career, Hall of Fame, and that's really about it. The article really doesn't speculate on why it may have happened. Doesn't make any mention of some sort of underlying heart condition or history or anything like that. So, we're kind of just sitting here thinking, what in the world is going on? All right, so, of course, sadly, Shane Warne passed away. And what it says here at 7news.com.au, a post-mortem has revealed what led the Australian cricket legend's passing on Friday. Okay, so the post-mortem, as stated here, has worked it out. It says the cause of death was natural causes. All right, so that is the official cause of death here. He was only 52 years old, very, very sad. Said here that it was previously revealed that Warne had suffered chest pains while he was still in Australia and recently saw a doctor about his heart. And that's basically all it says. So it's very, very, very concerning what has happened there, of course. We move along here, another tragedy. Senator Kimberly Kitching, also 52 years old, understood to have died from a heart attack. And I really can't see any explanation here in the article. It was sudden. It's been described as it suddenly happened, and that everybody is in shock. And of course, this has triggered Greg Hunt to call for Australians in this particular age group to go and get their hearts checked. So what do you think is going on? Ladies and gentlemen, put your thoughts in the comments. I think it's highly, highly disturbing that people who appear to be otherwise healthy are having these sudden complications. And I think there are certain questions which are not being asked, which need to be asked and need to be spoken about. Alrighty, so, all right, now, ladies and gentlemen, all right, so that just about brings us to the end of the show for this evening. So this has been a shorter version of MCJ Report tonight. Of course, full steam ahead with our campaign. I'm trying to fit as many things I can into one day. So let me just open up the chat box here to see if there's any familiar faces tuned in. I haven't been monitoring the chat this whole time. I can see Sharon there. Sharon, a great MCJ supporter. Also the Facebook security guard, and she's doing a great job of that as well. There's Big Matty. Matt, how you going? Great to see you here on the broadcast. There's Brett. There's John. There's Julie. There's Brad. So Brad, if you'd like to put a prediction in the comments, where do you think this is all going? Put your thoughts in there. There's Lyle there. It's great to see you. There's Sarah. There is the Sound Tractor official on YouTube. That's right. So we've got a bit of a crowd on YouTube going. There's Adriano. How are they called honourable? That's right. Well, there's really not many things honourable about the current politician. And when I do this report on how much us taxpayers are forcefully funding to fund the lifestyles of politicians who don't even serve in the parliament anymore, I'm telling you right now, it's going to make you angry. It's going to make you angry. John Howard alone, I was looking at some reports, 80 grand a month. Nice office, some travel expenses. But that is just the tip of the iceberg, the former prime ministers, the former MPs as well. We're going to take a look at what Greg Hunt's pension is going to be when he leaves office. I wonder what it will be. And maybe while we're talking about Greg Hunt, maybe we should make some bets. Who here thinks that it's likely that when Greg Hunt leaves office, he might be, what's the right word, headhunted based on his merit and skills and offered a nice position working for maybe a company in a field of whereby he may have been a minister in that area. Hey, we're just asking the question here. If Andrew Robb is anything to go on with ministers getting out of politics, then I'd say that every Australian should be paying very close attention to every single MP who voluntarily leaves on their own terms. What do you think? I tell you what, this Canberra situation is absolutely rotten from the inside out. That's why we need to do something drastic. MorganCJonas.com, independent for Senate. We need more independence in this country. More independence to hold the parties accountable. Who here thinks that's a good idea? I'll tell you the biggest problem I see with the major established parties like Labor and Liberal, or even Nationals and the Greens, right? When it comes to voting time, nobody actually knows who they're voting for. They just vote for a brand name. They vote because that's who their parents and maybe their grandparents voted for. For all Australian voters know, they could be voting a psychopath into office, and I dare say there is a multitude of psychopaths and control freaks currently in office, and they need to be gotten rid of. That's the problem with voting for a brand. That's why this federal election, we are encouraging people everywhere in Australia to take measures to find out and understand who your local candidate is. Make an effort to find out who they are. There's a lot of freedom-friendly minor parties out there, but that's not to say they all have the best candidate. So if you're trying to make a decision, find out who the individual is and vote for them based on their merit and based on what they are willing to demonstrate in public. Now, following on from this cycle of Australians voting in people they don't know, and let me just add that individuals make all the difference in politics. Individuals absolutely matter. Okay, if we think individuals don't matter and it's all about voting for a brand name, then you very well could get more of what you don't want. So people vote based on a political party name. Those particular members or candidates get voted into office, Labor, Liberal, and then what do? They vote along the party line. How many elected members of parliament legitimately vote their conscience? I'd say that it's a huge minority, and therefore the cycle continues over and over again. How many Australians voted for these politicians to receive these massive pension plans once leaving office? This is not democracy. Find out who your local candidate is and play a role in history, play a role in reversing this destructive, toxic, anti-democratic cycle that we have in Australia. Together we can do it. But if we don't act now, then I'm afraid the time is rapidly approaching that it will be too late. Anyway, that's my closing monologue, ladies and gentlemen. MorganCJonas.com. Sign up, join our campaign, become part of the team. Let's make history, and let's go and hold these bastards accountable. All right, lots of love. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you really soon on MCJ Report.